Hello, I'm Kat Harper, Events Manager at the National Steinbeck Center in Salinas, California. We're very happy today to be collaborating with Downtown Book and Sound for this joint Inspired Talks webcast and Facebook Live event. Please welcome Trish Sullivan, owner of Downtown Book and Sound.
Hi, I'm Trish Sullivan, and I'm with Downtown Book and Sound, and I want to welcome you to our event featuring Dan Linehan.
So today we also have the joy of having musician Dan Beck lead us in with a song. Take it away, Dan.
I think this is called Watching the World. I've not been playing enough. I've not been writing my stuff. I've been a bit out of touch, well, watching the world go by. It keeps on turning, even burning. We keep on yearning for when we'll see love fall. I've not been happy enough. I find the news is a crutch. Exposed too much, I get way out of touch. Well, watching the world go by. It keeps on turning, even burning. We keep on yearning for when we'll see love fall. I've been laughing enough. Life and love still feel a bit rushed. We miss the hugs, so we're all out of touch, yeah, watching the world go by. It keeps on turning, even burning. We keep on yearning for when we'll see love fall. The world keeps turning, even burning. We keep on yearning for when we'll see love fall. Have I been crying enough? Loss of lives and outpouring of love. Compassion rests in each one of us, yes, watching the world go by. Keeps on turning, even burning. We keep on yearning for when we'll see love fall. Watching the world go by. Woo. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Dan Beck, everybody. That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Well, the Inspired Talks are a series of exciting, bold, and diverse talks that invites authors, scholars, artists, and musicians, and more to discuss their inspiration, their process, and celebrate the timeless themes of John Steinbeck's writing. Our guest today is author Dan Linehan, author of The Princess of the Bottom of the World series. Welcome, Dan.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me very much. It's a great honor to be able to give a presentation and talk about my book in Steinbeck country.
We understand that right after graduate school, you moved from the East Coast, where you grew up on Long Island, and the Midwest, where you went to grad school in Indiana, all the way here to Steinbeck country. What brought you here? And of course, what we want to know is, how did this inspire your work? And specifically, what was the inspiration behind writing this series?
Oh, okay. So you packed in a lot of questions there. But really, what got me out here was an engineering job right out of grad school. So in Salinas, there was a facility that made microchips called Integrated Device Technology. And so after grad school, I came out to work as an engineer there in about 1995. And I worked there for about 5 years. But I had, over that course of time, and even back into my graduate school, I got a little bit more interested in writing, and a little bit more interested in writing and being this great, area, again, Steinbeck country. The influences that inspired him to write all his great books, were obviously inspiring me as well. With that, I guess I can kind of maybe get into the slides if you think, Kat, and I can kind of describe a little bit how all that just kind of came together for me and formed, I guess, the background and the content and all the cool stuff that I kind of distilled and brought in to this book.
Absolutely. I do understand you have a wonderful presentation for us. So why don't you go ahead and get that started?
Okay, great. All right, well, again, thank you guys very much for having me here at Downtown Book and Sound in Salinas. And the Steinbeck Center, National Steinbeck Center, is right down the road too. So once everything, I guess the Steinbeck Center is closed to people right now, correct? But it's open to events. So please stop by as soon as you can. And then the same with the bookstore here. It's a great bookstore. It's an independent bookstore, and we need to support our independent bookstores. But I think the big question is this is a book about Antarctica and exploring Antarctica, and how do you actually go from exploring Antarctica to writing fiction? And it seems like a very, very big jump, and it kind of is in some ways. And for me, I initially was not planning on writing about this story as a work of fiction. I actually went down to Antarctica to study climate change and environmental issues. And I came across all these amazing things in my journey, and I was there for gosh, the whole trip was maybe about 60 days. But I tell you, what ends up happening sometimes when you take a journey, and I'm going to read this quote, and it says, "A journey is a person in itself, no two are alike, and all plans, safeguards, policing, and coercion are fruitless. We find after years of struggle that we do not take a trip takes us." And of course, this is John Steinbeck who said that in Travels with Charlie. And that certainly was the case for me. As I was doing this, as I was getting ready to kind of start this new career of writing, I was working a lot in sciences still, but this event happened in 2002, which is really what I consider the point that got me started on this book. When the Larsen B ice shelf disintegrated in Antarctica in 2002, this happened in about 35 days, and it was 1,255 square miles, which is 6 times larger than the Monterey Bay when it's bounded by the points, Point Pinos and Point Santa Cruz. That's a tremendous amount of ice. And so I saw these satellite images, and I recognized this, and with all my background in science, I'm like, something strange is happening. So I really started to pay more attention. Then I found out places like Antarctica, boy, this was heating up faster than the rest of the world. The rest of the world is heating up, as we know, but Antarctica, for some reason, is kind of the canary in the coal mine. In fact, it was 5 times faster than the rest of the world. So I figured that I really needed to get to Antarctica to understand this better and to study it, and that's kind of what I did. And so it took me a few years to build up the skills as a writer and to actually be able to come up with a plan to get to Antarctica, because back then it wasn't so easy. And I was fortunate to be able to get this plan together where I would start off coming down to Ushuaia. I would go to the Falklands, South Georgia, South Orkneys in Antarctica, back to Ushuaia in Argentina. And then I would travel in Patagonia and then up to Iguazu, spend some time in Buenos Aires and head home. At least that was the plan. But really, again, just like again, plans change. And so this is some photographs. This is a radar screen from the ship, and all these little green dots are icebergs. And you can see these are all the icebergs that were in front of the ship that we would kind of hit once in a while. And you might kind of expect some of that stuff kind of going to Antarctica. One of the cool things is, this is the bow of the ship where I was kind of reaching over and taking the photograph. And here's another iceberg that we were just about to split in half. So that was kind of an interesting thing when you kind of experience actually hitting an iceberg and not sinking. But we had an ice strengthened hull on the ship that I was in. But again, when I was there, it was very, very clear that that climate change was happening. You could see it all around. Here we have a glacier that decades ago, it used to reach the shore. The shore is all the way back over a mile. Behind, this is right here, is just a meltwater, but the bay is all the way behind these mountains. You can see these are tabular icebergs. Some are thousands of feet long. Crevasses. I hiked up a glacier to kind of look down on this. You see a lot of calving. And this is an interesting photograph here. This is the expedition leader here, and we're hiking up a continental glacier in Antarctica, and it's so hot he wasn't even wearing a shirt. Can you imagine that, right? So it's unbelievable. And then I was also interested in wildlife issues. It's something that, again, I study in Monterey a lot and I write about a lot, and it was really evident. You've got these giant factory fishing ships that are just, that there's almost no regulations and policing out there, and they just annihilate everything. It's not sustainable. You can't keep fishing like that. Like what we had in the Monterey Bay when we were not sustainable with sardines. We wiped it out, and that crashed the economy. So then you have other things. Again, the heat. This is a penguin that was panting like crazy. Invasive species. The sealers brought these reindeer for food and meat, but they end up basically eating up everything because there's no natural predator. So the ecosystem goes off balance. Then you couldn't go anywhere without seeing the effects of whaling. That was really tough to see. And so far, all the way down in Antarctica, you could see plastic pollution issues. And this is a seal being strangled by a fishing line. But some really things that were super, super unexpected happened. This right here is another radar screen, and it's like a C shape right here. And what it is called Deception Island. And the island, it looks basically like a sea, and it's got this entrance into it. And you're able to go into that entrance, and it's an actual active volcano. And they use that inside as a harbor because it's protected from the ocean and the rough winds. But when I was there around the time, a ship that looks very much like this actually hit rocks that were right here in this pristine area. And I'll kind of get into that in a second. But I had just basically been to this island when about a week later, a ship hit those rocks. So reality really changed for me quite substantially when I was on this trip, like I was telling you. It started out where I was just going to be researching wildlife and climate, but some events happened that were just kind of unbelievable events. So you can see this is a little bit of my path. This is that Deception Island that I was just showing you, the C-shaped island that's basically an active volcano. So after I finished my trip, I just finished Antarctica, I headed back to Argentina. I was going up Argentina, going into Patagonia, and I was in Iguazu when I learned about this accident. And I decided, because I still had time, I'm going to go down and report on it. So I decided to actually go down to Argentina, the seaport again, to actually investigate it. So this is again where the story really picks up. And again, why did I decide to use fiction instead of nonfiction? Well, I decided to go down to write about it. And so I staked out the port. I got a hotel room where I could see directly into the port. And here you could see all the guards come in, and I actually was able to infiltrate the port and write about it. And it turned out that even though the cruise ship sent out the press releases that everything was fine and dandy, it actually wasn't. The cruise ship actually did spill fuel oil into the habitat. Everybody knew it. I actually was able to interview people on board, and they said, "Oh yeah, it was evident. It was all over the place. You could see it. Yet, so far away, it was basically swept under the rug." Unfortunately, nobody really seemed to worry about it too much. So even though I tried to get the story published and ran, no one really kind of seemed to be very interested in, a cruise ship basically leaking fuel oil into a habitat, sensitive habitat. This is the sister ship that actually removed the evacuees because they couldn't even use the ship afterwards. They had to pull the passengers off. But again, life kind of changes a little bit. In reality, when I was there, I met a person. It was a filmmaker. So she is basically the inspiration in terms of the princess part of the book. And so, if you're going to write some fiction, you're going to have some characters. You're going to need people to kind of hopefully propel the story. And this is where, again, the person who I met down in Argentina comes in. And so after meeting her and then getting experience with this accident, my trip actually went from 37 days to 63 days. And while I was down there, originally, I was going to be writing nonfiction again still. So I started to publish some of the photographs and write a little bit of nonfiction on here. But still, I was figuring that there might be a better way to tell the story, to maybe get it out there more, to communicate it. But I really couldn't stay in Argentina indefinitely. I had 2 book projects that were waiting for me when I came back. So I had to kind of put my Antarctica work a little bit on the back burner as I finished, my paying job. So then only a couple months later, after coming back from Argentina, this boat actually hit an iceberg and sunk. So you could see how potentially rough this area is. This boat, the Explorer, these are the photographs I took. This is now at the bottom of the ocean. So you could see that there's some crazy stuff that could be going on. It's still a dangerous place out there, right? So I got a chance to finish my space books, and obviously they take a lot of time, and I needed to get back to this really critical issue that I was writing about when I was in Antarctica. And to do so, to really jump in, I joined the Climate Reality Project based upon the Inconvenient Truth. Al Gore had put together this group that basically gives slide presentations. And so I was really excited to kind of get back into my environmental work and my climate work and my wildlife work. And while I was doing that training, basically about a month later, I ended up doing a cover story for the Monterey Weekly that talked about severe weather, because I learned a lot from the training from the Climate Reality Project about severe weather. And so I was able to do this. This came out in 2012 in September, about a month after I did the training. But then a month later, Superstorm Sandy hit. And it was a storm that was not supposed to happen with the strength it did. It was not supposed to hit so high up. We had super, super hot waters that all contributed to a storm that no one thought could ever happen. But we're starting to learn that because of the environment and the climate that we have, we should be expecting these storms more and more. So this is a big problem for me. I had to do more. I was then working on another project at the time, a paying project, with C Studios Foundation on a project called Otter 501. I was basically taking the film that they had made and making a web story for it. So if you kind of look over there, it kind of might be hard to see, but that little tail over there is a whale. That's one of my photographs. But I was in charge of putting this web story together and having this really nice communication thing. And this experience really helped also inform the multimedia book that I just did. So 2012 is wrapping up, and I actually was watching this movie, Midnight in Paris, with my brother around Christmas time. And this is, again, really important. This is a story about writers and artists, and they're writing about Paris and making songs about Paris and painting about Paris, and they were in Paris at the time. So what happened is I kind of was like, all right, I need to get back down to Argentina to finish my book. And this really inspired me to do that. So I applied for a residency in Argentina, and only about a couple weeks later, I was accepted. And a few months later, I was down in Argentina writing about the story that I had put together from Antarctica. But the amazing thing that happened is I was there for 2 weeks, and the worst storm in the history of La Plata hit. can you believe it? The worst storm. This is a photograph from the time I was down there. This is a car floating. These are in Spanish, but these graphs should be kind of easy to see. In a few hour period, there was 12 inches of rain that fell all at once. In one day, it was over 15 inches of rain. And La Plata is actually a modern planned city. It actually started as a city. It didn't like grow from like a village to a town to a city. So it had a lot of modern infrastructure, but it just didn't have enough to compensate for all that rain that fell at one time. It's just too much. So over 50 people died. And to make matters worse, downstream of the city is a major oil refinery. And to protect itself during the flooding, it closed floodgates. And when they closed the floodgates, it allowed the floodwater to rise over 6 feet in places, really impacting the city. So amazingly, the oil refinery, to save itself, basically sacrificed parts of the city. So again, you're going to see a little bit of a theme here. After I worked, I was only supposed to be in Argentina for 90 days. I ended up spending a year and a half down there, working on the book, finishing the draft, doing some other writing about Argentina. But as I returned, I started to see the things around me, the environment, the impacts. I was starting to see more severe stuff. This is a picture of the Sobranas fire that happened in 2016 in Big Sur. And at one point in time, this is one of the most severe fires that we had in California. And you can see from this photograph, this is the Milky Way up there. This is Garrapada, and the fire had just started there. And this is, I could smell the smoke from where I lived. It's interesting to note, I'm going to show this slide. This is a little bit of a sciencey slide, but you can see here's the average temperature, and you can see the years. And you're starting to see, when we know this, that the average temperature over the years is starting to creep up. This only goes to about 2016. We know the last few years have been hotter, and so we're up here now. But there's a correlation between the temperature and the number of large fires. We're getting more and more large fires correlating to the increase in temperature. Wouldn't you expect that if things are drier and hotter, fires are easier to happen? This is from the Cal Fire, recently published. This basically shows the top 20 largest wildfires in California. From 1932 to 1999, that's how many. That's about 70 years. About 20 years is this much, from 2000 to 2019. In 2020 alone, we have this many. That's significant. There's a trend there, right? If you were to kind of look at this, you'd expect that we'd be getting more fires. And hitting right home, we're in Salinas. This is the river fire. This just happened in August. And this is me. When I was driving down, you could see the fire breaking out. It was almost 50,000 acres that burnt here. I was helping evacuate some horses. I was helping evacuate friends. But this is a major disaster, right? And at the same time, we had the Carmel fire and the fire that's happening in Big Sur. But all the fires that broke out along California when we had a massive dry lightning storm, which is, again, something that's not normal. So really what I'm seeing is this world changing, and I'm trying to do something that will better connect people, make them realize that, hey, you know what? These fires aren't just happening in other places. These floods aren't just happening in other places. If you really pay attention, you could start seeing them happening all around, to people you know, to family members you know, and it's really getting more severe. It didn't used to be like this. Now, the thing is, too, is this all takes a huge amount of money and resources to remedy floods, to try to fight fires. We as taxpayers end up paying the brunt of this. Yeah, the money comes from the federal government, but it's got to get the money somehow. It comes from the state government. It's got to come from somehow. So it's really important to remember that, you know, this stuff is happening. It just doesn't go away. We are paying for it, and we're paying a really, really, really high price. So this is Smokey the Bear over here. He's got a little sign that says the fire danger. This is actually in the orange section when this broke out, and lightning caused this fire. This is kind of a funny thing. I caught this photograph over here. It says, "Our future is on Mars." Let's just hope that he is not correct, because, you know, if we do put some solutions in place, maybe we don't have to like find another planet. Earth will be fine. So anyway, with all that that I've been working on through the years, I found that maybe building a series that has got all this action and adventure and nature, and you've kind of put a little bit of the climate just because you see it around you, right? So that was kind of the idea of the book, and it became the 7-episode series. So the first episode starts out in the port, then the Falkland Islands in South Georgia. Episode 4 goes to Antarctica, then to Patagonia and Iguazu, back to talk about the cruise ship, and then up to Buenos Aires again. One of the really good things is that it's a novel, right? So it's a work of fiction based on true stories, but I also had such a large amount of videos and photographs and actual just real data and information and graphs and all that fun stuff that was part of my journey. So I was able to use this, put a multimedia travel companion together. And if you remember the slides that I showed you when I worked with Otter 501, I did this web-based thing where I took all these photographs and video and put them together. I did the same thing when I first was in Argentina and Antarctica. I did a multimedia thing. I took it to a whole nother level with this travel companion. So now, essentially, when you read the book, it's a free website. And as you're reading and you want to see a photograph of a penguin or something that actually relates directly to the story, you can. So all you do is click that, and all of a sudden you'll see what I was talking about. That's not normal for novels, but I did have all these extra assets, so I kind of wanted to do something special. Same with songs. You can see what the songs I was talking about. Videos I was talking about. There's an index that has all the different animals and the creatures and things. Then I put stuff about other like iNaturalist and Happy Whale. These are really cool websites. So this is the real whale that I saw in Antarctica, and you can actually track him through photographs. iNaturalist lets you kind of explore the different species that I saw. These are all photographs and species that were part of the book. And again, the maps, which you've kind of talked a little bit about. So on the last part of this thing, I put a video trailer together too, which you guys should be able to see as well. So we'll hit this a little bit in a second, but basically I've got some links for you that you guys could check out and kind of explore. And so, Kat, we're going to bounce back, and I think you wanted me to do an excerpt or answer some questions first.
I do. The one thing, we just had our conversation series start this past week, and one of the questions that came up was, do you think that fiction makes nonfiction more easily digestible? So the statement that you're making with the environment and with those processes that we need to put in place for our ecology, do you think that putting that in a fiction scenario is easier for us to digest as a society than a textbook would be?
Sure. Well, I'll answer this way, and I'll give you a Steinbeck reference. If it wasn't for Steinbeck's Cannery Row, we probably wouldn't be thinking twice about what the ecological problems we had with the overfishing of the sardines, right? That was a really important thing that we are hypersensitive in Monterey, in the Monterey Bay area, because that's our backyard. But the rest of the world doesn't know that. Fiction allows for a much broader connection to people. Especially, again, I mentioned, the whole princess aspect of it. So, fiction has usually got, characters that you're able to kind of learn about them, see how they grow, and kind of root for or root against, or however you want to do that. But they show you how it's not, you're not sitting there saying climate change is bad, this is going to happen if we don't do it. You're actually seeing it with real people and how it affects real people. And so you're not seeing graphs, you're not seeing charts. And I think that's a really powerful tool, because anybody who's been in education, if you just throw a textbook at kids, they're not going to learn it, right? I mean, there's many more things that go into trying to communicate complicated issues. And I think using fiction is a real great way, and not just fiction, the arts, the visual arts, music, movies, photographs, all those things are really powerful tools to help communicate challenging subjects like climate change.
Well, and the wonderful thing about this series is the fact that people like me who do want to see the charts, who do want to see the maps, who do want to know what that animal looks like that you're writing about. You included that with that multimedia addition for this.
Yeah.
What inspired you to think, hey, this needs to be part of this?
Yeah. So again, going back to, my background has always been really multimedia. As I became a writer, I was always kind of involved in film kind of projects and aspects like that. And again, all the photography, most of what you've seen here is all mine, unless I noted it somewhere else. So I was really keen on that already. And so with the experience I had when I first did that little website that I worked on in 2007, then the Otter 501 project, but also I referred to those two Spaceship books, the Spaceship 1 book and then the follow-up, The Race to Space. In each of those books, those were nonfiction. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to tell the story in a narrative form with text, but I have over 200 photographs in each of those where you could actually just read the captions and look at the photographs and get the story there. So I thought that what I could do is I can give the nonfiction version of the story through the Multimedia Travel Companion. There's captions there. They're scientific. They're actually, they'll talk about the animals, the correct size, all that stuff. So people can actually have these two paths. And I think that, again, why do I do it? Because I wanted, it's like scaffolding in education. I wanted somebody to be, if once they kind of got interested in, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know there's all these interconnections about the world. And through the novel, then they could branch out and then kind of look at the more scientific aspects of it.
So give us a little bit then, because this is so much more complicated than, say, your standard fiction novel. Give us an idea of how you go about tackling that, because you have so much more at your fingertips to enrich your story and to enrich your presentation. How do you sit down to write that? What's your process?
Okay, are you talking about the travel companion or the whole giant thing together?
The whole thing. I mean, that background information, a lot of us who don't write are in awe of those of you who do. And we don't even understand how you could sit down for, 8 hours a day and just write. But this
It's
is
not 8
so
hours
much.
a day.
It's not?
Oh no.
Is it more?
Anybody who knows me knows it's not 8 hours a day. Writing is an evolutionary process. So as I talked about, when I went to Antarctica, originally I was going to try to do nonfiction, but the circumstances surrounding it, the input I was getting, allowed me to kind of change my course a little bit and said, you know what, it makes better sense that maybe I try this fictional approach. Now, when I first did the fiction, I was not necessarily, even though I had all that multimedia connection and background in the past, I was not necessarily thinking, you know what, I'm going to write this in parallel because I've got this great multimedia travel companion. No, I just focused on the novel, and I tried to kind of make it a regular novel by itself, but I was fortunate to have a beta read a few years ago with a book club, and they read a really early draft of my book, and I got feedback from them when they were reading it. It was just like a regular novel at that point in time, and the feedback was, "Wow, I really loved your descriptions," and they wanted me to learn more and more about this, or I was jumping on Google to see this. I wanted to really see these. And I'm like, well, I had got all that stuff. And I worked on that Otter project where I basically did exactly that. And I was then able to just evolve that into so much more. But the process, again, is this super evolutionary process. And again, I started working on this book, more like 15 years ago. And so you could see, how long it's taken to kind of get to this point. So it certainly wasn't a simple, like, I didn't just, decide one day to write a novel and bang off a novel.
Well, that leads us right into, would you please read us one of your favorite excerpts of your novel?
Okay, all right. So you may have been looking at this thing. I didn't know we were going to have so many questions and answers. Otherwise, I would have not left it on me on the campfire. But I guess that's kind of what we're at right now, or maybe a bit of a campfire scene.
Exactly.
but this is me as a youngster, and it's kind of funny because again, I was an engineer. This is not representative of what I was as a kid. I was out running around in the woods, yeah, totally true, but I could never imagine ever being a writer at that point in time. In fact, I even wrote this on the forward of my first book, that once any of my English teachers would have ever heard that I was a writer, they would all have heart attacks instantly, right? So this is a bit of a misnomer. I'm not normally like this, you know, in front of people, I guess. But this is kind of a special time, and I think like again, a lot of writers will put their personal stories and life into their books, and it's true for a lot of writers. But this is a story that is really nice. It's in the book, and it's based on a true story in this case. Now, the book isn't entirely all based on true stories, just for a caveat. So I do use, you know, the elements of fiction and drama to you know, tell the story. But this is pretty true. This is from the episode 1 and chapter 3, and it's from the chapter called Fish, Frogs, and Alluvial Fans. One morning, while in my late teens, I woken up early to go fishing with Eddie, one of my younger brothers, at nearby Blydenburg Park. Just past the skunk cabbage and muck at the swampy eastern edge of Stump Pond, we usually caught largemouth bass and sometimes reeled in bluegills and yellow perch. The pond was the headwaters of the Nessequa River, which flowed into the Long Island Sound. As we started casting from shore, we noticed a large American bullfrog right along the edge of the water. I caught all kinds of snakes and turtles and lizards and frogs, but never a bullfrog though. Usually the much smaller piccolo frogs and Fowler's toads. I crept up to give it a try. Somehow I was able to reason that instead of trying to grab where the bullfrog was, I should try to catch where the bullfrog might be in the air once it jumped. I was dumbfounded and 100 times more astounded than the bullfrog when I actually managed to snatch it around the waist mid-jump. I certainly would have garnered the highest admiration from Steinbeck's Mac and the Boys, even after the grand success of their frog collecting foray within the pages of Cannery Row. It didn't take more than a few microseconds to hatch my plan. Since my sister, Marie, was a big Kermit the Frog fan, so I hightailed it out of the park, leaving my fishing gear with my brother, jumped on my bike, pedaled like mad with a giant frog in my hand as its long legs dangled in the airstream, and ran into my house and snuck up to my sister's room. My good luck held out. Not only was she asleep, she faced me and slept on the edge of the bed. I got real close and put the bullfrog a few inches from her nose. I started calling softly, Marie, 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 until she woke up and screamed. Knowing a little of my family history explained a lot. I was the oldest brother and she was the only girl of 6. Out of all of us, she was the one to become a herpetologist with a side expertise in bats. I like to think I had a helpful influence on her career choice. You never know what experiences will make lifelong impacts on kids. And
Oh my
that
goodness.
is the bullfrog.
Growing up with older brothers, I sympathize with Marie.
Yeah. And again, for those who don't know, a herpetologist is a scientist who is an expert in reptiles and amphibians.
Yes. So what's up next? Now that you have this series, are you going to create a new one?
Kind of it depends. There's a saying in writing, in novels or any type of books, once the book is published, half the work is done. And so it requires a tremendous amount of time and effort, especially these days, as we're all suffering through COVID. You know, it's a challenge, you know, to keep things going. So it takes an awful lot of work. At some point, I would like to do the prequel to this because there were some extraordinary circumstances that helped push me as an engineer who really didn't really know about the environment, wasn't into recycling, wasn't into these things. That just wasn't in my radar growing up. But something happened along the line that kind of I started to kind of understand. I started to put it together. So the prequel would be great, and then there's a period of time that happens. There are two periods in time in the book, I should say. One when the character is going to Antarctica, and then one when he's older. There's a period of time between that I'd like to kind of unpack about what happens to this character between those periods. And then the other thing is, you know, I'm working on a screenplay version of it, which is already finished and started to go through competitions and stuff. So trying to put some effort and energy into that.
That sounds amazing. Well, we're getting ready for our almost to our question and answer period in this presentation.
Hello again. Well, we do have a question from Stuart Thornton, and his question is, let me look at it really quick again. His question is, well, first of all, he says, "Good talk, Dan," and hi.
Thanks, Stuart.
How would you describe the plot of The Princess at the Bottom of the World in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, a man must travel to the coldest and remote place on earth in order to warm his heart to love.
That's a nutshell, all right.
Yeah, and so the idea is that's a real short sentence, but for the novel itself, the character is going down to just study climate change, to just immerse himself in science and just, you know, put his head down and work. And things happen. Life happens. There's that famous quote by John Lennon. It's in his song. It says, I'm paraphrasing, life happens when you're busy making all your plans. And in the novel, the character goes to Antarctica, but things happen. You know, he meets people, adventures happen, things that are unbelievable. I mentioned the storm that happened when I was writer in residence in Argentina. That really happened. But what I did is I took that storm and I tacked it on to that time when I was actually just after returning from Antarctica. I kind of put those two events together. So that's kind of the fictional part of it. So the story really kind of follows this person who's going to study, who's going on an adventure, he's going on an expedition. What he thinks is going to be one thing, it turned out the things you could have never imagined. And parts of the book that are really fascinating to me, if I was to ask you, I'd say, hey, tell me what in your mind does Antarctica look like? I think most people can say, you know, hey, yeah, you know, penguins, lots of ice, you know, icebergs and stuff like that. But if I was to say, what do the Falkland Islands look like? Or what does South Georgia look like? A lot of people would not even really know where those places were, let alone know what they look like. Now, when I first went to plan to go to Antarctica, I ended up going with an expedition company called Cheeseman's Ecological Safari. And I heard about them through KZSC, the college radio station in Santa Cruz. So I was able to join this expedition, which is like a benefit for the SPCA of Santa Cruz. I wanted to go straight to Antarctica. I did not want to like bother with the Falklands. I did not want to bother with South Georgia. Thought they were just wastes of time. They turned out to be some of the most amazingly beautiful places I'd ever seen. I mean, imagine these black brow albatrosses, and that's a chick of a black brow albatross, right? Imagine, and they're giant. I mean, they're the size of geese and bigger. And imagine seeing nothing but these animals, hundreds of thousands, as far as the eye can see, from coast to coast, all the way out to the horizon. It's just insane. And the beauty of the animals. And so I think like when I was there, I was learning, I was seeing things, I had preconceived notions, even though I was trying to be open-minded. The story really kind of talks, a major theme is about that. You know, we have preconceived notions, we go in charge and do something, and if we don't leave our minds open, we're just gonna whiz by stuff and not see anything. And so really this story is kind of about that. It's about kind of opening up to that. And so I think that kind of describes like the theme and the plot pretty good.
Well, that leads up actually to next question from the audience. With everything that has been happening in the United States, weather-wise, have you considered writing fiction to help Americans understand climate change?
Okay, well, this doesn't, I mean, I mentioned climate change a lot in this talk. You'll be surprised, there's probably not that much in the book, relatively speaking. It's not just a book about climate change, it's really not. It's an adventure of people, and just like, for example, Grapes of Wrath with Steinbeck and Cannery Row, both of those books dealt with severe environmental catastrophes, right? You have the Cannery Row with the sardines, then you have the Dust Bowl, which caused the migration from the Midwest area to California because of poor farming practices, right? Okay, so this thing, this book definitely addresses climate change, but it doesn't do it super detailed. I think, like, again, going back to one of the questions you had earlier about using fiction, the nice thing about using fiction is you don't have to slam people over the heads with it. You can just kind of integrate it into the story and just see how it affects real people. Otherwise, you write a nonfiction book about weather. And mind you, you did say weather. There's quite a big difference between weather and climate. So weather is just kind of like, what happens within the 1 or 2 or 3 days out. Climate is the overall average, which is significant. And we can understand the climate very well. We can predict that very well. But predicting if it's going to rain on 3 o'clock tomorrow is harder to do. So I think, I hope that this book kind of tackles some of those things you asked in your question.
So you were talking about the space books. We have a question from our audience. I think the idea what they're trying to get across is how would you use fiction to explain the space books that you wrote? I'm
Okay.
sorry, I hope I got that right.
Okay. Well, the space books themselves that I wrote, mind you, if the general question is how would I fictionalize space? Well, Star Trek and Star Wars do darn good job of fictionalizing space. Tons of science fiction, Battlestar Galactica, you name it. So I think, like, space is one of those areas that has been fictionalized to death. I mean, seriously. So I think, but my book kind of covers, my books cover the new space realm, which is how people, like, ordinary people, who've got a lot of money. So I guess they're not that ordinary. But if you have enough, you could buy a ticket to space. And this kind of new wave of space has been happening over the past few years with Elon Musk and SpaceX. You've got Virgin Galactic, and you've got other companies trying to kind of get into this. So I think, like, actually, it's funny you said this. I did write about this in a fictional way about the new space industry. Because imagine, we've got all these detective stories, thriller stories, vampire stories. Well, why not have, a fictional story set in this new space realm? So yeah, you could do something like that. In fact, I wrote a story about that.
Our audience member, she cleared it up for me. She said that she was wondering if you could basically do the same multimedia take on space that you did with this series.
And attaching it to a book. Yeah, so it's it definitely is possible. So if you've got, say, for example, I've got those 2 nonfiction books. There's an awful lot of assets involved in it, and it certainly could be done. The problem is it takes time and it takes resources, just like anything else. This has been a labor of love. I'm a starving artist, so it's really difficult to put the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours on a project like this unless there's the resources there for it. I think, like, the Spaceship one and the Race to Space, the Burt Rutan's Race to Space, they'd be magnificent because they're so visual and there's so many elements. But it just is a matter of time and money. We have to eat.
I do have another one from the audience. It says, "Great talk, Dan. Thank you. Have you considered putting out a hardbound book version of The Princess of the Bottom of the World?"
Yeah, that's a great question. So like, I would absolutely love that because, you know, as a writer, I like books in hand. You know, this is obviously this book is multimedia, so it only works really online, and I made it episodic, and I used kind of like the ideas of like a Netflix series. You know, this is kind of like the new, you know, this is like the cutting edge of some of where fiction's going, and books, right? You know, online stuff. But man, we all are in front of computers and screens way too much. And I would really love it if there was a book version of it. But right now, you know, I'd have to revise it enough to you know, become a book. Or it's long. This is a long series. It's 150,000 about 150,000 words. So it's a little bit longer than your normal novel. And you know, being that I wasn't a well-established fiction writer, it's very hard sometimes to get a publisher to commit to a longer book. I think for it to be hardcover, I'd have to probably condense the story quite a bit, and I'm just still trying to get this story out. But I would love a hardcover book. So
I don't know, maybe it would have to include a DVD or something along with it to keep all of that, because the honestly, the extra features of the photographs, the maps, and all of this other information, it just makes it such a more rich experience
yeah,
in for the whole project. So yeah, I'm having a hard time in thinking about that
yeah,
in such a, what would be a condensed version. Yeah.
right, totally. Totally. Well, you know, it's
So
interesting. I was going to say quickly, you brought up the multimedia aspect of it. Now, one of the things, as I mentioned, the two protagonists is one's a writer and one's a filmmaker. So a big part of this book is these people had made a film, like a documentary together, a kind of a film. They're goofing around about their relationship and how they met, and that is really kind of the glue that is used in the novel to go between the two different time periods when Scott Sullivan, who's the main character, is going to traveling in Antarctica to when he's an older person. And so that film basically is called a framing device, like in Bridges of Madison County or The English Patient. I've used these examples before, where they've got a diary or a notebook that allows them to go back and forth between the time periods. So in the novel, I put screenplay kind of a format to signify when they're looking at the film, right? Now, a film is obviously a different media than words, but also there's background songs. So I was able to actually, you know, mention the song title, but you can actually hear the song when you click on like a sampler at Spotify, which is really cool because you can't really do something like that in a paper book.
right.
So again, there are some really kind of cool things that I did with this series that again were part of my writing experiences leading up to this. So again, they just have to be two different things. It's like a movie
Right.
can never be a book, and people just have to get over it. They're two different art forms. You know, you can't just say, well, the book was better, the movie was better. They're different, right? They're different things, and so this is just different than a normal hardcover book.
So Trish, did you find a question?
I actually do have a question, and I do want to just say that Danny Cumberland says hi. And she said after the presentation, but I just segment has to be there. I was wondering, we were wondering about how this might work as a graphic novel, as a way to or a series of graphic novels as a way to still kind of have some of that feeling of a multimedia experience.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was just a comment.
Yeah, that again, but it goes back to the thing, like, you know, it's it is an avenue, right? It's another platform for sure, and it's one of those things, you know. I think a lot of books can be converted back and forth to different things. It's just that, you know, it's difficult. It's a difficult, long process, and I think like if you were to kind of like maybe say, all right, this is an adult book. There's no doubt about it. If you wanted to say, well, how can you maybe splinter off an aspect of it to be more of like a young young adults or, even younger. You can do stuff like that where you're focusing more on the wildlife aspects of it. For example, earlier this year, I gave a presentation to preschoolers, right? That is before first grade, and they're really, really young. Now, you guys have now listened to a lot of the stuff I've shown, and it's complicated, but for those guys, I just changed the wording I was using and the story I was using, and I talked about penguins, and I'm like, hey, this is this penguin, this is this penguin, this is this penguin lives here. I just showed them the pictures, and they loved it. And at the very end, I said, if you guys like penguins, we just have to protect where they live. And they all got it, right? So that, in a way, you mentioned how maybe you could make it a graphic novel. There are always different ways of taking the message and the information that's packed into this series and bringing it other places. There's no doubt.
Well, that just answered my last audience question. So that worked out well. I hope, Virginia, that answered your question for you.
And so Stuart Thornton wants to know, how would you describe what Antarctica is like to someone who has never been there?
Wow. Stuart's giving me tough questions. He's a friend of mine. He's a really great travel writer, so, and a good Monterey guy, so look his work up as well. Antarctica is a continent, and there's a huge amount of diversity in it as well. There are places where I was hiking up volcanoes. There are places where, you're seeing blue ice, and boy, you'd have to kind of pick. It's like, how would you describe the United States, right? And use one geographical feature to describe all of it. It's just very diverse. But if you're forcing me into a corner, it's really hard to get to Antarctica, so it's extremely remote, and there's not a lot of services. And you have to, realize that if you fall and hurt yourself when you're on like an expedition, man, you're in trouble, because, it's really, you're really in trouble. And so it's a rough place. It's great that it's still removed from a lot of people, and it just hasn't been like divided up and spoiled. So you could still see a lot of like raw nature there. But as I showed in that one picture, I mean, it was hard not to find places that didn't have plastic pollution all the way in these remote areas. And that's incredible, I mean, it's about 1,000 miles from the tip of South America to Antarctica. I mean, that's a long distance, and you're still having those issues. But obviously, in our minds, we kind of seen plenty of David Attenborough, documentaries on Antarctica. There's a lot of ice, but when I was there, it was hot. Things were melting. I was not freezing to death, but I was there also in the summer. But with that said, it's been record temperatures out there. When I was visiting Palmer Station, which is one of the U.S. Antarctic bases, they for the very first time saw a king penguin, which is a species that lives further away from Antarctica in that region, which they normally don't see. King penguin is this guy over here. This is a photograph from South Georgia, which is quite a bit farther. That's part of the thing from Shackleton, if you remember the book Endurance. So long story short, it's a harsh place, but it's stunningly beautiful. I mean, it's just absolutely stunningly beautiful. So if people ever get a chance to get there, boy, do it. But it's changing, like a lot of places on the earth.
Well, our one of our audience members sums this up perfectly. Thank you for your good work, Dan, and exploring all avenues to get people engaged with climate talk. I think this has been fascinating for everybody today. You see what Dan has right behind him, that graphic. It has all the links, including how to purchase this amazing series. Thank you, Dan, so much. This has been so much fun and so interesting, and I cannot wait for people to be able to experience this series. Thank you, Trish, for including us in your Facebook Live. This has just been too much fun.
Great.
Take care,
everybody. Thank you very much, Pat.
Thank you. Good night.
Awesomeness. So we are still on Facebook Live, and I just wanted to say that there's
we do have another question from Danny Cumberland.
Yeah, I'm happy to stick around for as long.
Yeah, and so a couple of questions. So the first one was, what did you have to do to be able to get to work on board the ship? And then the second one, how did you get the shots? And the third, did you have to have special permission or paperwork?
Okay, so this is one of the most difficult challenges I had faced when I first learned that I wanted to get to Antarctica in 2002 to when I finally was able to get there. All those questions, I'm like, how the heck do I do this? But the solution turned out to be really, really fortunate. Again, I was literally in my office working with educational stuff. Again, I'm a science editor for some of my consulting work. I was working on like 4th grade food webs for an educational company, and I heard this public service announcement from KZSC. And again, it was like, hey, a benefit to go to Antarctica, and it kind of gives some extra money to the SPCA. And I looked into it, and I found out that there's this expedition company that's been doing this for many years, and they're super environmentally conscious and ecologically sound. Their guides, one of their guides had a PBS, had a nature program about him. The expedition leader, he's the one who developed the Happy Whale. And so it just had a phenomenal staff, and they were doing the right thing. So essentially, I signed up for this expedition through this company that is used to doing expeditions and safaris. So I didn't have to worry about the paperwork. There is, but they take care of that. There are no shots for Antarctica, which is really not much you have to deal with. But I was going to Iguazu, which is it's actually a subtropical jungle. So I did have to worry about potentially malaria, although it's not really that much of an issue. So I'm trying to remember. I don't think I took shots for anything. I had some malaria medicine to take if I felt that was going to be in trouble. But again, I went with a really fantastic expedition company. And, I'm still in touch with those guys. They do super, super great work, and their hearts are in the right places. It's really easy to do tourism and, again, just speed through everything. But I found that the people I was on the ship with really, really cared about animals. They didn't want just selfies. It was about learning. And I think that's the type of tourism that I support. I certainly don't support just people trying to checklist things just for the sake of doing it and not even understanding what they're seeing. But anyway, that company was fantastic.
Well, that's really interesting. And Danny says thank you. And Noreen Gillespie says, great talk. Thanks, Trish, Dan, and Kat.
Thanks.
And Glenn Guman, it looks like.
Yeah,
it says,
a pal of mine from grad school.
Right on. It says, great job, Dan. Hope more people get to enjoy your work.
Oh, thanks, Dan.
So thank you, Dan, for joining us. And if anyone, and let's see, we have Vikram Pavati says, awesome talk, Dan.
Thanks,
so anyway, you guys, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us and watching for this. And Dan, thank you for being here and walking us through this awesome series, The Princess of the Bottom of the World. We really appreciate it and happy to help get your message out.
Yeah, and you guys, thanks a lot, and support your local bookstores. Support your local museums. Support things that educate and get people knowledge and understanding and inform, right? Because in this day and age, facts go all over the place. Which is surprising that I'm writing fiction, right? But the reality is that it's influenced by facts, and the idea is that we're trying to try to give people tools and understanding so that they can take the steps themselves to better understanding the world around them and making better decisions.
Thank you, and have a good day, everyone, and stay happy, healthy, and safe.
Compassion rests in each one of us, yes, watching the world go by. Keeps on turning.